Good afternoon, Senate institutions. It's Friday, January 27th. We're going to have a discussion today with Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Starting off is going to be Gus Seelig, Executive Director of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And Mr. Seelig, who would you bring with you?
Good afternoon, and for the record, I'm Gus Seelig with the board, and with me is Trey Martin, who is our Director of Conservation and Rural Community Development, and our Policy Director, Polly Major. Trey's been with us for a little bit over a year. Some of you have worked with him in the past in other capacities. But he's been with us for a little over a year, and Polly came to us this year from working for over 4 years with Senator Leahy's team, so you may have come across her in the past. And Senator Harrison, who's not here, might know her family farm in Westminster where they make a great cheese, and she not only brings a housing background working with Senator Leahy, but spent many years working on the farm, on her uncle's farm, so she brings that to us as well. So I think, Mr. Chairman, first, congratulations on the chairmanship, and it's great to see you in this capacity. The assignment today is to give an overview of the agency, and I'm going to apologize because 2 of the members had to listen to me this morning, and they're getting me again this afternoon. But we've changed up the presentation at least a little bit. Some of it will be a little bit repetitive as well. And not in the presentation, but in the back of the handout is going to be this page, which is, you'll get an annual report from us, you do every year. And this just tells you the results that we've achieved over the last 18 months with the resources that you've given us, along with describing the kinds of impacts we like to have across the state. And more, I try to frame our work as rural community development. And I know Senator Maza can tell you that although a lot of people may think of Colchester as a suburban town, there are still people farming there and making a living on the land. And in lots of parts of Chittenden County, including Williston, which you probably think of at the corner at 89 in one way, there is still a fair amount of open land and places to hunt and recreate. So, and even across the country, people still think of Burlington as a small town. I know we think of it as a big city, but for most of America, Burlington is a small town. So we frame our work that way. What's different about the results we've achieved this year from other times is the housing numbers are way up. So in a typical year before all this federal money came, the housing numbers would be in the 350 to 400 home range. And obviously we've tripled production because of the investment that you and the governor have made in that work with one-time funding.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So looking at this FY 22 and 23, $56.6 million state money, leveraged $352.7 million from federal dollars.
Not just federal. So there's private investment in that. There's some philanthropic investment. There are bargain sales from landowners who, when they sell development rights, they always take the full value so it's a variety of different sources. It's not just federal funds.
Pretty good return.
We have always thought so. I have to say that the more housing we do in a given year, I just have to be clear and transparent, the leverage actually goes down. So because there are 2 different kinds of federal tax credits we use, and one is called the 9% credit, and it covers typically 60 to 65% of the cost of a deal. There's also, that credit is limited. There's also a 4% credit. And as you might imagine, the 4% credit is much less productive than the 9% credit for investors. And so it only yields a third of the cost. So the more we have to rely on that credit, but it's an unlimited resource. So the more we rely on that credit, the less leverage that we're going to get. But yes, leverage is part of our statute. I'll show you that in a moment.
Okay.
So I'm going to find the screen share and put it up. And Is that looking good on the, over
Yep.
there, or is it too big?
I think it's still a little big.
Yeah,
Okay. So you're looking at the Peasley Farm in Essex County, or one of the Peasley Farms, I can't remember which one, but as we talk about what the government proposed for us, a lot of our work is not just conservation, but doing things like improving the water quality of water for the state of Vermont, and both Lake Memphremagog as well as Lake Champlain are now issues of concern as far as EPA is concerned. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, and Trey will get into that in his part of the presentation. So just to go to the mission statement, this is in 10 VSA Chapter 15, and we were sharing this with Senators Westman and Starr this morning. They actually started this legislation in the House, but Senator Mazza was in the Senate at the time in 1987. And we're not just asked to conserve land or build housing for the sake of it. It specifically instructs us to do it because it's important to the economy as well as quality of life. And so we often try to focus on where can we have an economic benefit? How can we have economic benefits for folks? We're obviously looking at Lake Memphremagog and Newport, and that's a community that's really been hurt pre-EB5, but certainly since the EB5 scandal. And one of the great things that's happened in Newport this year is that a group called Rural Edge has been able to get an option with the nuns on the convent in the Sacred Heart School. They're going to turn the convent into 26 apartments. The school and land there is going to be later phases, will probably be 3 or 4 phases over the next 7 years to development of that property, but it's going to be, the community wants home ownership along with rental housing, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to deliver that up there. But it's a great opportunity for the community, and people will get to live there. Will, in some cases, have views of that beautiful lake. We've been involved in another project in Newport that I'm not going to show you right now, but we'll talk about a little later, the Scott Farm. And this committee played a vital role when Senator Flory was here in helping get a special allocation for Newport. This slide is about our multiple goals. One of our smaller parts of our work is historic preservation.
I just want to make sure the folks on Zoom can see the whole presentation. There we go.
Okay. But what you're looking at here in southern Vermont is 2 historic preservation investments. One is the Latches Theater Complex in Brattleboro, and the Latches family operated both a hotel and a movie theater from the 1930s forward. The family got tired of the business. A local nonprofit said, really important to have a hotel in downtown. And by the way, this theater, which is an Art Deco theater, is so beautiful. We can have performing arts here. We can, as the
Heard that name a lot over the years, but.
Yeah. So we supported their purchase of the Latches, and it's a great draw in the downtown. The Putney General Store had 2 different fires, one when the building was actually under construction. But they've reopened a store there. We've helped the Village of Algiers open a store. We're working right now at Center Angles. I don't know which way you come down, but if you drive by East Calais on your route south, you see there's a lot of work at the East Calais store, and that's a project.
there is. Is that's you guys?
We've helped with that. We're not the only funders, but we helped them through a program called the Rural Economic Development Initiative, with a Northern Borders grant.
Yep.
And so they've got a store operator for next year. We've helped in Albany as well with the reopening of the store. So we try, again, using historic preservation as an economic development activity.
Community owns the store and then they get someone to manage it. Or something.
That's the model here, is that they're basically taking the capital cost of the real estate off the back of the operator,
Okay, so they can
so that they can just try to make it work, you know,
break even or whatever they got to do. Yeah.
and hopefully do a little bit better than
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, so the community isn't, it's not gonna be a co-op, it's gonna, they've selected an entrepreneur
Okay,
who will have a very favorable lease and isn't gonna have any debt service.
I see.
So they've got to just, pay the overhead of operating a store, heat, electricity, cover the taxes, but they don't have to pay any real estate debt to be there. And
You have some requirements about how or what the store is to carry, or I know that's a little bit vague, but do you have any statutory requirements about what they must accomplish?
we don't. The East Callis Trust, which is the nonprofit that owns the store, will work that out with them. And each of these is a little different, but fundamentally, they found a young woman who had done a similar business in Maine, and part of the reason that they liked her was that she catered both to the lobsterman community and to the tourists, and they feel like, if you live in East Callis, and that's my hometown
Yeah.
actually,
I didn't know that.
you've got to cater to the locals, and you got to cater to the summer people, and if all you want to do is put high-priced beer in the coolers, there's a lot of people who want Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Right.
But they're not going to have, this group, I'm sure they had a debate about it. They're not going to tell the operator they can't have cigarettes in the store or anything like that. So they basically know that that'll be up to the store operator, what she carries. But she's somebody they've identified who wants to cater to the whole community, not just one segment of it.
I know the store that you guys helped with Albany, they probably couldn't have found a better operator. She'd already had successful business in Craftsbury Center. And I think she brought that model up to something a little bit more modern, and they seem to be doing well. Hopefully they can.
I haven't been there yet, so I'm glad to hear that.
They have very strong competition down the road. It's kind of a local guy that I've known very well. I was actually there when he decided to put the store in. So very, very tough competition in a very rural area, but they offer just something a lot more different, maybe a little bit upscaled, pulling from that crowd of Craftsbury. But they seem to be doing okay, and I hope that they do.
Yeah, and the middle picture is the old Bellows Falls garage, and this is a concrete structure that was built in the 1920s, and it just become an eyesore in the village of Bellows Falls. And it's going to, next year I'll show you a picture of what it's been turned into, but it's going to be 27 lovely apartments instead of, and at the backside you'll be able to see the Connecticut River. So that's underway right now, it should open this spring. Again, going back to what does the statute ask us to do? And I won't read all of this to you, but it calls for balance between housing and conservation. It calls for us to try to leverage the state's reinvestment. It calls for us to try to make the housing permanently affordable, to not displace people when we carry out the mission, to think about the whole state in the distribution of funds. And when we look at number 2, this really speaks to the COVID crisis, but also speaks to work we did after Tropical Storm Irene. It tells us to consider the need for timely response to unpredictable circumstances or special opportunities. And sometimes that's been, there's a fire in town. After Tropical Storm Irene, there was a lot of flood damage that we tried to respond to. So sometimes we drop what we plan to do and we try to pivot to meet the public interest, as you suggest we ought to. This year's capital construction proposal, we are in 2 sections of your bill. Section 16 is $1.8 million for either housing or conservation projects. Section 10 is the clean water section, and there are 2 parts there. One is $800,000 for water quality projects, and Trey will talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, and the other is for conservation that has water quality benefits. And I'm going to talk now a little bit about the history of how did we get into the capital budget, why are we here? And there have been years back in Senator Luzzi's time that it was suggested we really ought not to be in the capital budget at all. And I think we've been in the capital budget about half the years over the 35 years we've been around. This is our 35th anniversary. And quite frankly, this is a discussion that you have with folks across the hall in the appropriations room. And sometimes, although we're supposed to get a certain amount from the property transfer tax, they feel that there are other priorities, or governors have felt, and it's both parties, it's not a partisan issue, that need to be met. And so they notwithstand our fund, and they have often come to this committee and said, please make some funding available. The rationale for this, I think, is that the assets that we're investing in are going to be here when the bonds are paid off. And just in the same way that we make other capital investments in our personal lives, like buying a home that you're gonna benefit from over a long period of time, or the public investing in a school, it doesn't make sense to necessarily to ask one generation of taxpayers to pay for something that will benefit a future generation and will have the public asset in 20 years when the bonds are coming off. If we didn't need to be in the capital budget, I would not, it would be fine with me, but the appropriators often have other competing interests that has caused us to be directed to work with you folks, and so here we are. And that's the rationale. In about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, when we first had this EPA order and before we passed any legislation on clean water, Representative Shaw came to us and he said, don't your conservation projects have clean water benefits like what I showed you that first photograph, the Peasley Farm? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, would you mind if we labeled that so that we can show the EPA that the state is indeed spending money to clean the water of the state? And I said, no problem. So we've been in the capital budget 7 or 8 years in a row, and then it got labeled clean water. And then he came to us, and that's what that $2 million is. And then he came to us and said, you know, I think there are farmers that have a hard time getting water quality grants, and maybe you can get money on the street faster than other people could. And he came up with this idea that we'd be gap financiers for water quality projects. And what we do is provide grants of up to $40,000. Sometimes it helps a farmer make the match for the EQIP program or the BMP program at the Ag Agency. Sometimes there are projects that are going to have a great benefit for that individual farmer, but never get high enough up on the priority list. And so the Ag Agency was very much in favor of us doing this, and that's what that program is about. So that's sort of something brand new that Representative Shaw brought forth about 5 years ago. But the other 2 allocations have been going on pretty much every year since Governor Shumlin took office, and probably and other years beyond that.
Where else in state government are you getting funding out of? Or you have a line item in the budget?
We have a large line item in the budget. This year, the governor is proposing $21 million in a combination of base funding and one-time funding for us in the budget. Were we to get the full transfer tax allocation, we'd be up about $27 or $28 million in the budget. So the $3.8 million between those 2 line items gets us closer to that full amount, but it doesn't get us all the way there.
Yeah.
Project, and I'm going to turn it over to Trey because we'll talk about conservation, but a project that got capital budget funding this year, and I think when we did the initial deal, is Albert Dunes State Park. I know this is just outside of your district, Senator, but I think you were with, if I'm recalling correctly, we visited up there when the park first opened with Governor Dean back about 1999, and this year we added 160 acres to that park. And I'm going to hand over the next, I'll come back, but I'll hand over the presentation to Trey at this point.
Thank you, Gus. Good afternoon, everybody. For the record, again, Trey Martin, the Director of Conservation of Rural Community Development at VHCD. And as Gus said, I've been in the building for a long time. I'm relatively new to VHCD. I was here as an attorney at Downs Martin, and then in the Shumlin administration as the Deputy Secretary of A&R and the Secretary of Administration at the end. So very familiar with this room. Yeah, and with many of you, and especially with this kind of work, because the area of law that I practiced was environmental law and did a lot of land protection and land use law. So I'm new to VHCD, but not to these issues. You know, when Gus talked about the long-term asset value and why our projects make sense to be bonded projects, it is because of the multiple co-benefits and the multiple values that even on the conservation side, I know that's probably really easy to see on the affordable housing side, but on the conservation side, we're often seeing a combination of supporting rural enterprises and working lands enterprises, supporting biodiversity and climate resilience, flood resilience, habitat connectivity, and often there are recreation benefits that help to maximize the value of each rural acre that we protect. There's some, and when you factor in recreation in particular, there's there are direct benefits in every community where we invest, where there's access to a town forest or to a waterway, because visitors come and they spend $80, $100, $120 a day on the average when they're visiting in those places. But the community values, the long-term health values, the benefits that are harder to track are just as important, even if they are harder. So this, Gus talked about the project here was adding the sort of critical piece to the Alberta Green State Parks this year. This is one where this is highest value habitat according to Vermont Conservation Design and the ANR. But it also has, so that supports biodiversity, it supports species health over time. But there's water quality benefits by protecting shorelines. There's a mile of shorelines here. I mean, the one thing we're not making any more of is lakefront real estate. And protecting that and making sure that that has access for the public is so critical. Great habitat, great biodiversity, and then the recreational, impact of having this available to folks is really critical. This is a picture. These pictures are from Putney Mountain. That map shows the interconnection of a number of different VHCB projects over the years with our partners, the Nature Conservancy and the Vermont Land Trust. The investment we made on Putney Mountain West was a capital bond funded project. And it added 140 or so acres to a really elaborate network of conserved land down there. It connects to the Conti National Wildlife Refuge. It connects to Windmill Hill Pinnacle Association. It connects to the Lily Pond Highlands. Altogether, those different projects add up to a few thousand acres that are protected, and they give us that they're part of that strategy that I'm talking about of creating connectivity, so that conserved lands stitched together. We're often looking for projects where the land that we help to protect is then added to a bigger block of lands that are protected. Great habitat, great biodiversity.
That map is backwards.
Yeah, backwards.
Was that right?
Yeah, I was trying to figure this map out.
I was too, Senator, but I don't have my glasses on. So I was just assuming that I'm getting old and I didn't want to admit it.
Something's wrong. I don't even see someone's picture here.
Yeah. Oh, isn't that great? Well, so we'll have to head up north to Putney then. Thank you for catching that. We want to use this slide again. So we'll do that. I mentioned, sorry, I just finished with this slide to say that I mentioned recreation, and this is part of a 55-mile trail and 26. There's a 26-mile stretch on a ridge line here that draws so many visitors to the area. It creates all that economic support as well as the other kinds of values. I mentioned Lily Pond Heights or Lily Pond Highlands and Windmill Hill Pinnacle Association. So this is just another great project down in Athens and Brookline, as well as Townsend. Altogether, it was a little over 600 acres that were protected. Here you add in that these are working lands. So in addition to having there's great bear habitat here, there's moose habitat. You can see the water resources that are protected there, that beautiful stream. But these are acres that are worked and where we're able to take boards and cords out in a sustainable way and be part of the rural economy in that part of the state, which is always the goal. And as stuff comes over from the House this year, I think you will hear that there's a long-term strategy effort that we're engaged in to ensure that our conservation investments have those sort of multiple co-benefits, that we are supporting enterprises as well as biodiversity and habitat. Here you can see that there's a great photo and I think a right side up map for you of the Kingdom Heritage Trail System, which is a footpath over what was the Champion Lands. Really
Still around, Champion Paper Company.
I think the company may still exist, but I'm not sure.
Used to hear that all the time, years ago, all the time.
Well, we did this major deal with the Champion Company, and as part of that deal, Senator, they sold to another buyer, another forestry company. It's been sold probably twice since then. They've cut it really hard before they sold.
You used to hear about them all the time, Champion Paper Companies.
Right, thousands and thousands and thousands of acres.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
all
but-
for paper, I mean, they,
Well, they did at one time, but, you know, now they've, again, Gus probably has as much knowledge about anybody with it, but it seems to be going now. They're finding ways to get out of that type of business, and a lot of it's going to conservation. I mean, up in Essex County, I mean, just thousands of acres that have been transferred, whether the state has bought it out or the federal government's bought it out.
So what's different about this deal, as we did it back in 1999, is that there was 134,000 acres conserved altogether. A chunk went into federal ownership, a chunk went into state ownership, that were the most sensitive. And then about 87,000 acres stayed in private ownership all that time.
And that's still the old Conti land and up there, or
Well, that was part of the deal
Right.
at that time.
on the 134,000 acres.
Of the 134,000, some went to Conti,
Yeah,
some became a wildlife area that
right,
Fish and Wildlife owns.
right.
And then, but then it close to somewhere around 85 to 90,000 acres stayed in private ownership, and it's still in private ownership.
Yeah.
But one of the things we promised back then was that there's a permanent easement on all of it that requires dispersed public access, so there'd always be snowmobiling, hunting, fishing, hiking. And one of the things we promised back then was we'd look to create a trail, a hiking trail that the public would use. So about 3 summers ago, the summer before we started COVID, the Green Mountain Club actually opened about a 15-mile hiking trail that starts, I'm trying to blank on the name of the community, but Island Pond.
Yeah.
And, so I hope that eventually it's going to be a reason for people to be coming to Island Pond, is to do that hiking and enjoy the community in a wonderful way. So again, we're trying to think about how this can have economic benefit. It's actually a requirement in the easement, Senator, and I'll have to check on how it's working, that half of the yield be cut every year.
Yeah.
And that's the only easement that I know of that's ever had a cutting requirement in it. So Governor Dean really had in mind that this would continue to be working land. I think his thought was, this is such a big parcel, there should be something for everybody there. Snowmobilers should get something out of it, hunters should get something out of it.
I will relate to you that we're having a little hard time with the hunting aspect of it on the federal lands. They're really giving us a hard time.
I understand there's issues around hunting bear with dogs.
Yeah, and others as well, and even with bird dogs and so many. Yeah, so it's not just that, but it's just really public access where you have a collection of people that are making the decisions that are kind of anti-hunting. And so anything that they can make it difficult with and unrealistic, it's happening. So, as you learn as you go, you learn to make your deals tougher and stronger. The pressures that a lot of that are facing now are a thought process that 30 years ago that you would never think that would ever come to light. But
Yeah, I know that Senator Leahy worked hard on that, and the Conti Refuge is the only place in the country that the feds allow trapping.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that last year we had a proposal in front of us from a group that was buying a big chunk of land around Woodbury Mountain, and they wanted to prohibit any hunting other than deer. And we said, we're not going to invest there. That doesn't meet our mission.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that.
So that we've drawn a line there that, not that you should. There are sometimes we protect small parcels where
Right.
it could be a real problem to have too many hunters on it. There's one in East Montpelier where there's actually a lottery system.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's no hunting, but we can only have a certain number of hunters at once.
Which makes sense.
But we definitely want to see the land being used in a wide variety of ways. And in southern Vermont, we know that there's such an overpopulation of deer that it's actually hurting the ecosystem because they're chewing the browse before the trees can grow. So,
which is a huge issue in our neighboring states to the south. Pennsylvania and New York are having a really hard time maintaining natural forest cover because the understory and the regeneration is getting browsed before it even has a chance to get started. So, and And I think that's why BHCV is so committed to, especially on these bigger parcels, to making sure that we keep it open for, you know, not just rural enterprise, which we've hit on, but traditional uses for public access for hunting and for fishing and, you know, and content for trapping. That's part of what our statute says, and it's part of what, you know, our approach is to these decisions is to support that, not just a picture of the way of life that people imagine from Vermont, the working farms and forests that surround our villages and town centers, but the historic uses and values that we have. And just, I mean, to say it, you know, trail-based recreation is obviously huge, and you hear a lot about that right now, but can't overemphasize enough that diffuse access that, especially the Champion Land parcel offers for hunters and for anglers to get on there. Trail use is really, you know, it's having its day right now, but and it really helps to increase the value per acre, but so does access for traditional uses. Here you can see, this next slide is,
You know, Vermont covered bridge.
yeah, great covered bridge.
You know, we have 100 of those.
More than, we have the best per capita statistics on everything, right?
Yes, we do.
More covered bridges per
I
capita.
know we have to maintain them, it's pretty costly.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a long one there, wow.
So this project on the Lamoille River was about providing public access to the river. And one of the things, and you know, if you're familiar with Newport, if you're familiar with, you know, the islands, that Vermont was built up in the 19th century and the early 20th century with its back to the water.
Yeah.
Right, that our tanneries, our factories, and even some of our, you know, public investments were turned to face away from waters, and as a result, that public access was often, it was either, you know, closed or it was polluted, it was whatever. So restoring those waterways and providing water quality benefits is something BHCV does a lot of, but also getting people to be able to get on there to paddle and to fish and to swim. That's part of the promise of having, you know, widespread access. So great project with the Vermont River Conservancy. This one was, and you know, we get all that. It was a pretty minimal, it was a $26,000 investment that we made to help the Conservancy create that access there. I'm going to say a little bit something about a program that's not in the capital bill, but it helps to, it provides the context that Gus was starting with earlier around our water quality work, which is when Act 76 was passed and established the Clean Water Service Provider Program. And that's a program where the state invests money in water quality benefits that go beyond what the laws require. So you've heard a lot about required agricultural practices and stormwater requirements, and those get us towards our water quality goals. But we also know that we have to do more, and we need to pay for that. We can't just require landowners to do more than what the law requires. So investing in projects that give you that more, that extra regulatory benefits is what Act 76 did. The you know, Dave Snedeker and the folks at NVDA would have been the logical ones under that structure to take on that role, but didn't have the capacity. And so they asked BHCV back a few years ago, could we act as the clean water service provider for Lake Memphremagog Basin? And it fits in really well because of our capital bill program, where we're already really experienced in looking for projects that enhance water quality on our farms, enhance water quality on logging operations, enhance water quality through recreational projects. So working with the Memphremagog Watershed Association, also working with Senator Leahy, we got a Great Lake Fisheries grant of $3 million. That's gonna help us to build capacity in all those organizations. And so altogether, we're spending $4, $5, $6 million a year on water quality around the state, with a huge investment of time and capacity in Memphremagog, but actually a pretty modest state investment there that we're supplementing.
It does. So
Most of it.
So how do you think of vote?
It's 28 miles, yeah, I went up there last
What
summer.
do you have to do when you go across?
Oh, you have to, yeah, there's a reporting station, you report, so it's unstaffed, but you call in and you know, give everybody on the boat.
You don't
and all
stop at the dock somewhere.
that. You actually do, you stop and you call in.
Oh, and they tell you,
Yeah.
is it a narrow channel? You have to go
No,
through?
you just pull off on the side, and you can almost see that picture right there, almost shows you about where it is. It's basically at the base of that big mountain right there. There's at the base of that mountain on the left-hand side, this side of it, that mountain's Owl's Head right there. So, yeah, right,
So
yeah.
right across that open.
Yeah, so that right there is a channel that goes up through. It's a lot wider than what it was.
So if you went through a boat at midnight or 1 o'clock, there's still security.
Well, there's not really security. You're supposed to, you're supposed to check you in and this and that. There could be security there. I mean, there's 7 agencies on the state side that are
I mean,
on that lake at all
how
different
do they
times.
catch boats going by?
Well,
They don't.
yeah, they can or they don't, one
Okay,
of
I
the-
didn't know how
right.
you went.
You're supposed to go up, if you go out, you're supposed to check in and, check back in when you come back in, but then when, if you come back late, the check-in station is, closed down, well, then that's what happens, I guess. But, yeah.
They always talk about going across border.
Oh, yeah, and then there's,
Then you go by water.
and then, not to get way off subject, but if you go across and you don't touch land, you don't have to check in with anybody. If you don't touch the shoreline of Canada and you're not lingering, you just go across the border and you don't touch anything, you don't stop, you don't meet up with another boat, you don't have to check in with anybody. You can cross
How do they
that.
supervise something?
Well,
It must be an honor system.
A lot of it's an honor system, and a lot of it is if we catch you doing what you're not supposed to do, they'll take your boat. And it's happened. And so,
Okay, I just wondered how that
I can tell you this, that, my investment in my boat is, significant, and that what they ask me to do, I do.
Oh, no,
Because
I didn't
I
know
don't wanna leave my boat in
security they have.
Canada.
You can't
So,
go across the border.
Yeah, no,
Car.
yeah,
With a boat,
yeah,
because all the boats come my area, they gotta come from waterways, so.
Yeah, yeah, they do, yeah. So you gotta.
Which is, just it's interesting to talk about heading north. Really important to the final point I'll make about this slide is that people come south. And by virtue of having the bond funds that we have for water quality and being asked to do this, we were able to get that investment through the Great Lakes Fisheries, and we're working with Newport to help them with some projects that are going to help downtown and
Right.
shoreline development there that are going to be part of drawing visitors from Quebec down into the Newport economy. So
So the water quality of that lake is probably as important as anything. Water quality is important, but the biggest thing is Magog on the end of that lake, they still get their drinking water from that lake.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's important that we're not sending them stuff that we shouldn't send. And we have 3 rivers that come in. We actually have 3 rivers that come in on the Vermont side of it, and we also have the state's only dump that's on the shoreline of that. So. And there's other things that are going on there as well. So, yeah, we're always very concerned about that. Certainly, as somebody from Newport and live on that lake, it's nice to have you guys involved in for sure.
Question on the farm.
Yep. Go ahead.
The farm conservation, when you conserve 124 acres, 124 acre parcels, you pay the farmer X number of dollars and in return.
we acquire the development rights to that property so that we ensure that it's not going to be, converted from uses.
So if they decide to sell that farm, they have to sell it with those conditions.
Subject to,
And if they don't, they have to pay you back the money or no?
I don't even know if they can do that, right?
it's in the land records. The new owner wouldn't be able to come in. and-
It's in
So it has to be
perpetuity.
used for a
In
farm.
perpetuity.
But you pay the farmer so much an acre, is that what it?
Yeah, usually there's an appraisal, and right now appraisals are running really high for land that's in row crops and whatnot, and we work with the farmers to arrive at a fair price based on that appraisal. Often, as Gus said earlier, we get a bargain sale from people who are willing to take a little bit of a haircut on the appraised
So
value.
this 120 acre farm, I don't know where it is, but how much would they have got to pay for that easement or conservation? Would they get a one lump sum of $100,000 or?
Right now, we're seeing, depends on this, every farm is a little different
Yeah.
because it depends on what its amenities are, how much road frontage, what the views
Okay.
are like.
Yeah.
So, we're seeing appraisals regularly that are, development rights are worth $2,000 an acre.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
But it could go higher.
they can go higher. We did a project in Stowe last year that was much, much higher. And a man who spent his life milking cows gave us a bargain sale for 1/3 of the value. He came away in a good position, but he made the largest bargain sale we have ever seen in 30
So the
years.
person, maybe I should know this, but anyway, the person that, this 124 acres, for example, say you give them $200,000 and they decide next week not to farm, the land is still preserved, but you don't care if they farm, well, you care if they farm, but they don't have to farm.
So what I can tell you, Senator, they don't have to farm. they're likely to lease to a neighbor. And you will find that a lot of the larger operators in the state, if somebody smaller goes out, will either want to buy that farm or lease it.
Okay,
So we ask the Vermont Land Trust, who visits every farm every year or every other year, is the land in production? And most years they're reporting that 97% of the conserved land is in some form of production.
but they don't have to, I mean,
We cannot force anybody.
but it has to be open for conservation, it can't be used for
Yeah,
something else.
I mean, there is actually a provision in the easement that if the land lays fallow long enough, that we can ask them to get it mowed so that we don't lose it entirely for agriculture.
Okay.
But
Sorry.
we don't
No, I want you to ask, please.
we don't, we can't, we are at the voluntary end of land use. We're working with willing buyers and willing sellers. We don't, so nobody's ever forced to sell their development rights, but people.
I just didn't know what provisions were on there, once you give the check for a couple $100,000 maybe, and what do they have to do with it? They can't turn it into anything else. I mean, it has to be open.
It can't be developed. That's what they're selling the right to
If
do.
they sell that to someone, they have to assume that.
They assume that obligation, yes.
Okay.
Of course, it's gonna be a revenue source. If they didn't want to do it, there's a revenue source, as Gus had said, to lease to another farmer. Yeah.
But yeah, farmland conservation, I know there are a few slides that we should just move through quickly so I can hand it back to Gus to talk to you all about housing. But, you're talking about protecting that land base for our food production. You're talking about, investments in the people who are working that land, often at the time of intergenerational transfer or transfer between two families. And often there's a lot of debt or there's a lot of, financial distress involved in this work. And so by taking that conservation easement, we achieve those long-term land protection goals, but again, are really helping to stand up those enterprises.
I think Alcohol Farms, Yapple, or South Hero did that. I think they did that.
Here's a couple of farms that are really fun. One, the folks, Phelan and Kelsey at Pegasus Meats worked with VACB, not only on the conservation end of things, but got both of these got $40,000 grants to do water quality projects. So for the folks up at Pegasus, we were helping them to, they have a specialty pork products business and they sell to a lot of restaurants and a lot of stores, but to help better protect water quality and take care of the manure waste coming off of those lands. And then the other, Deer Flats, also got a similar $40,000 grant that we helped them to get a manure storage farm, a dry storage farm for manure, so that you have less water quality benefits, but also that product is much better taken care of. So really, we touch these enterprises in so many different ways. Now this is it's a bread and butter farm up on the top there, up in the northwest, headed towards you, Senator Mazza, and then God's Country Farm in Holland there, the photo. We all want to visit there, of course. But these are great water quality projects that the board invested in through our bonded money. Dorset Peaks Jerseys down in Danby is another good example of farmland, and where we combine that investment with water quality and great agronomics. We help them to increase yield, take better care of the water resources, and make their enterprise more sustainable. I'm going to flip again because we've got so much to tell you. But one of the things, again, this is not necessarily bonded money, but another way that we're supporting rural enterprises is through the viability program, Farm and Forest Viability, which is celebrating its 20th year at VHCB this year. That helps rural enterprises with business planning, with long-term strategic plans, with accessing grant monies. We work with the model there is to take the state's investment and use that investment to help hire technical service providers who can go on to farms or go to rural enterprises and help them to develop the kind of long-term plans and business acumen that they need to be successful. We talked about leverage earlier, and it's incredible.
It's not completed yet. They've been building it. So
Incredible leverage that Farm and Forest Viability sees. You can see that in 22, We work with 150 businesses. We're supporting over 400 jobs and $34 million in sales. That's the fabric of Vermont's rural economic landscape that we're trying to help protect. And then a program within Viability is the Rural Economic Development Initiative, which I know in the Ag Committee, you're very familiar with their work, which is working with communities smaller than 5,000 people to help them access grant funding. And that is a 20-to-1 return on investment that you see down there in terms of the leverage that they achieve and help those businesses to bring in. Overall, when we talk about just the rural economic development, it goes back to the statutory charge that VHCB has, and it gets to the overall theme that I've been trying to leave you today, which is that these investments they support rural enterprise access, downtown improvements or small downtown improvements, recreation, community health, individual health, as well as protecting the aesthetics and the landscape that people value about Vermont. And I can't think of anything more beautiful than looking at Bluffside Farm and Prouty Beach and the investments that we made up there. $200,000 we committed allowed downtown Newport to connect to this fabulous asset. And then
I live right across from it, right straight across from it. It's just beautiful. It's just to look over there. And
my favorite bike ride is up along that AV Spur Trail, which is another place, Senator, where you can go into the library at the border and go out the front door, and you're in Quebec. So,
you'll have company.
It's not quite Howard Frank Mosher stuff, but it's it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand it back over to Gus to finish up with you all. I know he wants to tell the story about Guy Schwenier and the work that we've done with them over the years. But this farm in Highgate is probably the poster child for VHCB's work.
That's the farm they're talking about, Bluffside Farm right there.
That's right here.
That's a railroad, and it goes, oh yeah, it goes right by my house. Yeah, that is right there. Yeah, I own right up to it.
We used to have that, and we have the bike path now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Senator, I don't think we've ever been in the Transportation Committee, and that's okay, but one of the things that.
If you want to come any day.
We'll
bring pictures anywhere you want.
One of the things that we have now done on a few occasions is, and did here, was to support the building of a bridge that connected Bluffside to Prouty Beach. And the way that happened is, you may remember that when the EV5 scandal broke, Senator Kitchell and Senator Fleury got together and they asked that $1.2 million be set aside in the capital bill for the Northeast Kingdom to help recover. And 200,000 of those dollars went toward building that bridge. And then we made this grant that Trey was speaking to, this from the Rural Economic Development Initiative, to help them do grant writing, because they had to raise over $1 million, and we helped them win an Oregon Borders grant to help build that bridge. So we've actually been involved with, right now, just in Linden, with a covered bridge down there. So bridge building is not our mission, but when we talk about economic activity, these kinds of bridges we have begun to get some familiarity with. We just opened one across Vermont Trail over to the Winooski also this year. So this picture here is of the Schwenier Farm in Highgate. And this year, Guy Schwenier won something called the Aldous Leopold Award, which goes to somebody who's doing outstanding conservation stewardship. It's as high an honor as you can get. We nominated him for it. It actually comes with, I think, a $20,000 prize. The inset picture is what the farm looked like in 1999 when we did the conservation. And back then, Guy's dad owned it. And we didn't know the future, and that isn't how people want farms to look. And what you see in the larger picture is what Guy did with it. So having sold development rights, what he decided was, I better invest in my soils and in my soil fertility. And he's become what we call an all-star cooperator with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. He's used every program that would make sense for him to improve the quality of the soils and make his land productive. He took the farm organic. He bought a second farm. I know that organic dairies are struggling. So I might be out of school speaking about this today, but we visited it a summer or so ago up there, and his son was planning to take the farm over. So it's been a great success story. And I think, you know, Senator Mazel will remember it, certainly Senator Starwell, when we began this program, people were saying to us, all the land's going to just grow up to Tucker Brush, where they were really pessimistic back in the late 80s and early 90s about the future of agriculture. And there are always challenges with agriculture, but he is the sort of entrepreneur who's shown what you can do if you have a mind to make your farm and your soils productive. And I think what we saw during COVID was, with all the supply chain interruptions and shortages in grocery stores, was a lot of our neighbors started to buy from their local farmers. And it turned to be a very valuable thing.
So did you say he was organic?
He's gone organic. It was not organic back in 1999 when his dad was operating.
To make your point too about the pucker brush and growing up, and even Senator Maz's questions from earlier about asking what happens to this land. I mean, you can go into New Hampshire and you can look at everything that used to be farmland, but you really can't look at it because you go down the road, the trees have grown up, and you just can't see anything. You're just going down the road. And for Vermont, because we've done so well as far as to keep this land cleared or naturally cleared with farming and what have you, every time you come up around a corner, it's the most beautiful sight that you ever saw. And that's because the land is still being worked, it's still being maintained, and all of that. And I mean, I think that the one thing that gives Vermont, there's so many things that are special about Vermont, but one of them is that it's still a farming state, a farming community, and it's just really because of how the land is managed and taken care of.
Well, and I believe that that contrast that you see of open space, open fields, beautiful fields, and then the woods and the hillsides really contributes to why people come here in terms of recreation and travel and tourism. So I think the economic impact is larger than just the rural economy. In terms of the working lands, it's what is bringing people to Vermont for quality life. So this last section, and I know you'd like to be done because it's a Friday afternoon, will just be on housing. And a lot of what we have done has been to restore housing. These are two projects, one in Rutland and one in Fairhaven, that were recently restored. Oops, that went too far.
Skip ahead several slides there.
No,
There's where we were, but I'm gonna move this ahead. I know we're running toward the end of this. So a big part of our mission is what we call permanent affordability, and I just want to talk about the importance of that in terms of the public investment. And back when we were getting going in the 80s, there was actually a project in Essex, a 100-unit project that the feds had financed, and another one in Moortown, 32 units. And the developer who owned it played by all the rules, but he went into the Farmers Home Administration one day, and they allowed this back then. He said, "I'm prepaying my mortgage." And the next thing that happened was that in Essex, he doubled the rents. And so 100 families in a community with a terrific school were all out of there within a year because they couldn't afford it. In Moortown, he converted his project to condominiums. And again, people had to find other places to live. There was a great fear back then by both Governor Cunin and then Mayor Sanders that Northgate Apartments, the largest rental complex in the state, would be converted to condominiums. And part of the reason we were brought into existence was to help preserve Northgate Apartments, as well as the kind of projects I just showed you in Rutland County, so that people would not lose their housing. Last year, we all opened the newspapers one day to see that the Bove brothers were good business people, thought they could do something more profitable with their housing in Winooski. And they eventually changed their minds, but 24 new American families, mostly new American families.
Did you have to give them money to do that?
We did not. They just
On their own?
they backed down.
Okay, yeah, because they were getting a lot of bad publicity.
They were getting a lot of bad publicity.
Rightfully so, it did go over very big. And that was-
But I think my point, Senator, is that it is fiscally the right thing to do, that when we use the state's resources in housing, that we're saying, okay, we're gonna take this off the speculative market and not have people displaced. If we, at Northgate, we invested $2.9 million back in 1989 to conserve 336 apartments. The whole deal back then cost $22 million to do. If we just let the developer out of their agreements today, and we had to build 336 new homes, we'd be talking about $130 million project
Yeah.
that we need to do. So it's not just that we don't want to displace people. What I would suggest to you is that if you're a fiscal conservative, that permanent affordability means we're recycling the public investment from one generation to the next, so we don't have to buy the asset over and over again.
That's what scared me today. Somebody the other day, they were paying $2,000 a month. And now they want $2,400 a month, and they're taking advantage of these. What are you gonna do? It's just, wow. And then we got down the street, this the Handies own these cottages that are just run down to nothing, and charging all kinds of rent. The folks that are there, they're not. Terrible.
Yeah.
Sad.
Now, I did this lousy message very well. Yeah.
Okay, a big part of our work has been in downtowns in every corner of the state. The building up in St. Albans is new construction, as is the one in Brattleboro, but lots of historic buildings. We've also worked out at 40th and Allen. If you know, Officers Row covers the Colchester, on Route 15, Colchester, Essex line. We developed a condominium project there, again with permanent affordability. So the half units are market and half are permanently affordable, and they recycle to new buyers. Here's a project, again, we care about the small towns, that was just revitalized in Pulteney this last 18 months or so, and really nice apartments restored. We do work on emergency shelters. This is a new winter shelter in Brattleboro that we helped open this summer. And all of you know we have a problem with opioids in the state. And when Governor Scott took office, he appointed Jolinda Claire to head his opioid task force and council. And she came to me and she said, the most important thing you can do is create what we call recovery residences. So this facility, which is one that's for women and their children, just opened this month in Barry. There'll be 2 under construction in Bennington County, in the town of Bennington this summer. There's one up in Colchester under construction as we speak. I think there are 32 households.
You do much with private home ownership or in a partnership way?
I'm getting to that right
Okay,
now. While we label this slide diversity, equity, inclusion, we've funded 1,500 home ownership units around the state over time. Just opened this 20-unit condominium project in Winooski at the O'Brien Center this summer. Habitat for Humanity, there's 7 chapters around the state, and they don't build a lot of housing, but we do a few units with them every year. And they've now built close to 160 houses with us over the years, all over the state. So we do have an impact. The 1,500 homes, because people don't stay forever,
Right.
have now benefited more than 1,900 families.
Yeah.
So again, the subsidy gets cycled from one generation to the next. And every year there's about, over the last 5 years, there've been 40 to 50 homes that have come on the market that we don't pay a nickel more for to get the next family into. It just recycles because people have agreed to share the appreciation.
Good.
They got a good deal to get in and they're paying it forward. We have a big pipeline on the housing side, but there's a big pipeline for our conservation work as well. At least 56 farms in process, lots of land that we're interested in conserving. I spoke a minute ago about the Sandboard Covered Bridge in Lindenville, which will be, I think, a great asset to that community. Senator Mazza talked about Bayview and South Hero. And this really helped a community that didn't have much of a community center develop one.
Nowhere, now they do.
And now they do. And so right adjacent to these 30 apartments, some of which you can look out and see the lake, is a health center, bagel shop, and library, and the fire station is right next door. So
Brand new libraries 2 years ago, and the bagel shop that down front, that complex, down back, beautiful senior housing they own. Cider Group is.
Walking over the lake, yeah.
God, it's beautiful. It's the main entrance to South Zero. Fire station, new fire station, and a new brewery going right next to the fire station. But it is a central entrance.
Seniors like that, right?
Yeah, they can walk right over there.
they don't have to worry about driving home.
They walk or wheel.
They go walk home.
They can get a bagel, get a beer. Two
Did you
B's.
say some of this market or it's all low? Is that all low income?
What we generally do, and let me just define this for you, we partner with a tax credit program that the feds give us. And I can't remember the numbers that they use specifically, but I'm gonna guess if there's 30 apartments, 24 of them would be for people at around 60% of area median income. And 6 or 7 would be for people up to median income. And so we always try to have a range within the development and a range within the neighborhood. We don't always achieve that, but that's what our goal is to make sure that we're not isolating people of modest means. And we're trying to center projects in a wider community so that we're not isolating poor people off to one part of
The
the.
lake views don't necessarily go to the higher payers.
They
Or
do not.
Okay, that's really fair.
I can imagine that once in a while you guys are criticized for the price of the projects of where it's at. And my own kind of personal story with it. The one you're involved with Rural Edge in Newport, which was the old Catholic high school. As a real estate owner of real estate companies, we've had people in there to look at that project. And the monies just to get these structures to where you could start building on it. By the time you clean up the asbestos and the lead and all of that stuff, it's just millions of dollars. And then as a private enterprise, it's just really too costly forever to get them to turn that into a profitable type situation. And then what do you have after that? You have that building that's going to sit in there to perpetuity until it just falls in the ground, or do we get you to come in there and be able to make it, to turn it into something successful again?
Well, and you're speaking exactly to what I call a market failure. When the market can't work, I'm in favor of the private market working. And if the private market could produce housing that somebody could buy for $300,000 or less, that would be great. If that private market could produce rental housing that would rent for $1,200 a month, that would be wonderful. But when a private developer goes to pencil it today, it just doesn't come out well. So the reason for public intervention is when the private market can't function the way it should.
Yeah.
And you could visit the Aubuchon building here in Montpelier, and from the 1940s forward, the upper floors of that building stayed vacant. And when our lead paint program went in to measure the lead contamination, it got the highest reading our machine could read, the highest reading we'd ever seen. It was just awful, and no private developer in 70 years had taken it on. The transit center building here in Montpelier, DEW was going to build apartments above the transit center, and the market got too difficult, and at the last moment, as they were getting ready, after 25 years of planning, Senator Cummings will tell you, they said, we can't make the numbers work. And that's when we said with a group called Everett North and Downstreet, okay, we'll put the resources together to build something there, because it didn't make sense to just build the first floor when you could build some great apartments above it that would be in walking distance to services. So that, I think, if a private developer could have delivered senior housing in South Hero, more power to them, but it wasn't going to work financially and have somebody earn a profit. I described in the morning committee a project called the Putnam Block, which is right at the, in Bennington at the convergence of Route 7 and 9. Key building, upper floors vacant since the early 70s or mid 70s. And what the president of the Bank of Bennington said when we broke ground was, this is a project that makes no economic sense, meaning you can't get a financial return, but it made all the community sense in the world.
Right.
And so I think that's what a big part of what our role is to correct where the market can't respond.
I think you had the same outcome in St. Johnsbury on that block there, and we're just basically waiting for that building to get condemned when it's all said and done, because that was what was going to happen. And you folks came in there and
Well, I'm going to describe that a little bit differently too, because St. Johnsbury had that problem. A private guy from Massachusetts took that building over in about 1990, and he got HUD to give him a big slug of money, and he converted it into this rabbit warren of apartments. And he didn't care about Vermont at all. He owned a similar building over in Windsor that we helped buy out in 2008. And some of you know that St. Johnsbury went through a lot of difficulty in municipal government about 12 years ago. Everybody in town government quit their jobs, from the fire chief to the police chief to the town manager. And then one year, the voters voted 4 members of the select board out because all they did was fight with each other. And when they got a new select board, they started to say, okay, what are we going to do? How can we make progress in this town? Paul Costello came in, had a community visit, and the community said, this building is holding our downtown back. It's so terribly managed. It was years and years of a bed bug infestation. And it was really the community saying, we really need your help, state of Vermont. This is our #1 priority. And that's when Senator Kitchell worked with Senator Flory to get that special allocation for the Northeast Kingdom. And I would say to you, we paid too much to get that guy out of ownership, but it was absolutely essential to St. Johnsbury being able to move forward. And now he'd left 10,000 square feet in a downtown vacant for most of 30 years at the key corner of the downtown.
right.
Now the downtown, that's owned by the local economic development corporation, and they've got all the commercial spaces filled. And if you've been to downtown St. J recently, it's just doing so much better. There's lots of good things happening there. Last fall, I was in Barrie for another one of these community visits. And in the evening session, as they were talking about their downtown, somebody said, we just want what St. Johnsbury has.
And I think the untold story of that, Gus, is that it encourages others, property owners, to up the game. You look across there now there's an urgent care there. There's an attorney's office that was always there before, but now they have great signage. And you look down through there and it looks like a prosperous area again. It doesn't look like it's run down downtown. It looks like a place where you want to go, you want to be, you want to invest in, you want to come and visit, you want to support. And that is because of what you guys did on that corner.
Yeah. And that story has happened across the state. We made some early investments back in the 90s in downtown Brandon.
Yeah.
And one of them, Senator Collmore, we were talking about Representative Wood, who was not among our biggest fans philosophically. Good person, but he didn't like public spending money on things he thought the private sector ought to do. And there was a landlord in Brandon who was pretty notorious.
Yep.
And he owned,
I know, I read it from it.
he owned property that was literally on the other side of the railroad tracks, and there was a mobile home, and then there was a fire in one of the buildings. And eventually, the Housing Trust of Rutland County made a deal and bought it from him. And the day that we opened the project, Representative Wood showed up for the thing, and I said, would you like to speak? And he said, no. And then he stuck out his hand to shake hands, and he said, but I wouldn't be here if you hadn't done something good in my community.
Bob, that's good.
And that was as good as it was ever going to get, because Bob delighted.
You'd have to know Bob.
Was the landlord Sid?
That was the landlord, yes.
We won't say the last name, but to protect the innocent.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Again, we are always trying, our goal is to improve the quality of life in communities. So again, that mission statement, economic vitality, quality of life. And you're absolutely right, when something good happens in a community, and my hope, Newport's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But when one good thing happens, like building that bridge, it makes people feel like, well, maybe something else is positive can happen.
Well, I'll tell you too, on a personal level about that, it's actually between that and what's been accomplished with the Lemuria Valley Rail Trail and the trails besides that, it's made me a believer. It's made me a believer, and it's made me push as far as to be in state government for more. Because I've seen what it does for a community and what it does for an area. So it even fosters even beyond what the community can do. It fosters somebody who wants to do more for the state and for the community. So
Yeah, I was in Danville 2 summers ago, and we made a small grant because they have an old railroad station that sits on the trail.
Yeah.
And they were using it just as a recycling facility. And they had a vision to restore it and make it more of a welcome center. And it will be the way that people who are on the trail get directed off the trail into the village of Danville.
Yeah.
And staying at a bed and breakfast, maybe staying, maybe eating a meal there, whatever it may be. It's a beautiful little village, but that was their vision for why they wanted to take this train station and turn it into something more than a recycling center. And that's the sort of thing that we love to help with. So with that, I don't know if I've got one more slide here. I just will leave you with something we did in Milton quite a long time ago, which was conservation at Eagle Mountain. And at the beginning of the pandemic, my daughter was looking for quiet places to walk. And I said, well, why don't you try, she was living in the Burlington area. I said, I don't think Eagle Mountain is, the locals don't. And she went over there for a hike, but because of the pandemic, she said it was quite crowded and being really well used. So anyway, that's our presentation today. If you have questions as you're deliberating the capital budget, you want us back on the governor's proposal, we're happy to come back. But most important, if you have a constituent and you think that we can be helpful to them, please let us know. Please make our phone ring. I'm already building a lot, but Trey and I are also available as you work through the many issues for your constituents that you work on.
thanks, guys.
Great work.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
presentation. Appreciate it very much. Kind of exciting.
Okay, that's always good to hear from the
On a
chief.
Friday afternoon, we want to make you excited.
Yeah.
Housing and conservation.
And Senator, if you ever want us to come into transportation and talk about bridge projects, they're not the bridges you're usually working on, but we're happy to talk.
Intermodals.
Well, he's got a store there. He likes to have an investment in.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Trey. Thanks for coming in.
Linda, as always, thank you.
Yes.
Twice in a day.
Thank you, Linda.
Well, committee, got any questions about anything or anything?
We'll continue to go through.
Yeah, so we're making progress. We're getting down through and stuff like that. And again, a lot of these backstories as far as what you get and the questions that we ask help when we report the bill on the floor. So, yeah, let you know more about this.